Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Amira. I will be presenting on Saul Bellow's Henderson, the Rain King. But before that, we'll get into some brief introduction on the author himself, Saul Bellow, and it will delve into 1950s America, and finally we'll touch on some themes and issues of the book Henderson, the Rain King. So let's proceed. Right, so Saul Bellow is actually short for Solomon Bellow. He was a Jewish-born Canadian American. He was actually born in Quebec, Canada, but then he moved to Chicago of United States when he was 9, and this is where he was raised and also where he furthered his studies. He studied in the University of Chicago, but then when anti-Jewish sentiments began to increase within his campus, he moved out and transferred to Northwestern University. Right, so later on in his life, he began a teaching career, and he taught in a wide range of universities. So some of them are the New York University, Princeton University, the University of Chicago, University of Minnesota, Bard College, and even Boston University. Right, so Saul Bellow was a very, very prolific writer. Throughout his writing career, he won many, many awards, and these are some of which he won. So there's the Henry Award, there's the National Jewish Book Award for Fiction, the Commonwealth Award for Distinguished Service, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Gold Medals, and then there's also the National Book Award for Fiction, which he won 3 times in the year 1954, 1965, and 1971. There's also the Pulitzer Prize, which he won in 1976, along with the very prestigious Nobel Prize for Literature in the same year, 1976. Right, so Saul Bellow's United States was basically during the 1950s. It was during this time that America was fresh out of the Second World War. It was also during this time that the World War ended, and basically the global society was moving forth, transitioning from a period of global scale war to social economical progress. So the United States, the American culture was fresh out of the brutality, the confinements of the brutal and violent confinements of the Second World War, and it was said that the Americans of this time, they underwent 2 contradicting phenomenons. One being the flourishing of their economy, which empowers and enriches the working and middle classes. But employment was on a rise, and every American from almost every layer of society was able to reap its benefits. However, there were also some very pressing but cold conflicts which they experience, and these conflicts can be characterized within these 3 particular periods, which we learned in class actually, and I really agree. You have the Second World War, the Cold War, and the Eisenhower presidency, which are very significant historical American events that proceeded to shape the American identity that we came to know today. Right, so the American culture of the 1950s was one that was actually so 1950s was a period where the entire world was moving from the atrocities of the Second World War. So in the case of America, which were very much like the others, which is very much like the other nations that underwent a very profound existential crisis, Americans, as illustrated in the literary works of this time, tend to speak of the imbalance of the values of self within a very consumptive, consumerist, materialistic society that deprives Americans of their spirituality. So this was a very, very dire situation, a conflict that was very palpable during this time, and one that was encapsulated within a particular excerpt even in Henderson ranking. So in chapter 3, Henderson speaks of an America that is so big and everybody is working, making, digging, bulldozing, trucking, loading, and so on. And he says, I guess sufferers suffer at the same time. Everybody wanting to pull together. I tried every cure you can think of. Of course, in an age of madness, to expect to be untouched by madness is a form of madness. But the pursuit of sanity can be a form of madness too. So this reflects the American society that the author himself, Saul Bellow, was in. He witnessed a very industrialized society that's hustling to move forward, to keep working, but a price that they had to pay was that they displaced not only their American identity but also their spirituality. So this is what Henderson ranking encapsulated, and which was very, very impressive. So the book Henderson ranking was written in the year 1959 within that context. So these are the several covers of the books. So about the book, it centers around the protagonist, a middle-aged American who inherits a wealth of $3 million supposedly by his very prolific author of a father. He has 2 wives, several children, but his discontentment and unease is illustrated within the first chapter of the book. He depicts very abusive and destructive tendencies towards himself and also the people around him. So he got to a point where he finally acknowledges his problem, and he realizes that he barely the person he is now is not one he is happy with. He is not happy with himself. So there is a need he recognizes to leave his current life, his current American materialistic life, for Africa. Why Africa? Is because he believes that these foreign and rich and supposedly hopefully rich experiences are what he needs in order to gain the contentment that his subconscious craves for. Right, so I identified 3 themes and issues within this book. So you have the notion of transcendentalism and the search for the ultimate truth. And then you have the quest for self-identity and the significance of self-reliance. Right, so first and foremost, transcendentalism. These are the textbook definitions on the slide. It's understood as an idealistic, philosophical, and social movement that developed in New England circa 1836 in reaction to rationalism. So it had influences from Romanticism, Platonism, and Kantian philosophy. So basically, it revolves around, it taught that divinity pervades all nature and humanity, all existence. And its members held progressive views on feminism and communal living. So meaning that it means that it is a revelation that there is an inherent relationship between one's self, one's individual and private self, and all of existence and all of their surrounding. So there is an unavoidable and inherent responsibility within all of us to acknowledge that responsibility, that relationship, and the significance of it. And its significance is the divinity that lies above it. It has a lot to do with the quest for the ultimate truth. So it usually starts off with a discontentment bubbling within a person, and the need to find spiritual contentment. This is its usual this is when transcendentalism usually manifests. So its process is beautifully depicted within the book, as illustrated by Henderson, Eugene Henderson. So this right here, I have a comparison between chapter 3 and chapter 13. You have an excerpt that talks about, in chapter 3, in the beginning, that talks about the voice in Henderson's head that says, I want, and it may imply to the profound hunger for materialistic means, and or also his subconscious and internal craving for spiritual contentment, even. So this is when he acknowledges a problem within himself. And chapter 13, it illustrates an event where Henderson believes that he has achieved true happiness. This is a scene between King Dafu of the village of Wariri, whom he has formed a very close bond with. So this is when he acknowledges the jubilation that overwhelms him, and this is what he has been missing out on, and this is what he would love to hold on to. So he says, and so my fear was transformed into jubilation, my spirit was awake, and it welcomed life new. Damn the whole thing, life anew. I was still alive and kicking, and I had the whole groom to Mulani. So here, Henderson transcends from a mundane American hedonistic materialistic life to one that has met a kind of profound spiritual fulfillment. So next up is the quest for self-identity. Self-identity here reflects on the disillusionment that Henderson faced, and this in the beginning of the novel, you can see how lost he is, how driven by emotions instead of rationale he was, and this disillusionment is reflective of the same kind of disillusionment that plagued the American society of the 1950s. So in chapter 9, when after the destruction of the sister of the Arnewi village, Romilayu, the guide, advised Henderson to leave for America instead, since his trip in Africa is not working out. But Henderson stands in his ground and he says, no, I'm not ready yet. I haven't found myself yet. I'm paraphrasing. But to me, this is what it says in chapter 9 here. He says, I went into the world one last time to accomplish certain purposes, and you saw for yourself what has happened. So if I quit at this time, I'll probably turn into a zombie. My face will become as white as paraffin, and I'll lie on my bed until I croak, which is maybe more than I deserve. So it's your choice. I can't give orders now, and leave it up to you. If you're going to Bevantai, it will be by yourself. So he says, no, I'm not leaving. If you want to leave, you go alone. I'm going to stay here and reach the destination that I know I will eventually arrive at. Far-fetched. Okay, so finally, this right here also is a comparison between chapter 1, chapter 8, and chapter 22, where his identity slowly solidifies over time, and this development is encapsulated within the beginning, middle, and end of the book, where in the beginning he is very abusive towards himself and others. He then develops a relationship between him and the people around him, also known as the villages he meets in Arnewi and Wariri, and he discovers the will to live as taught by the queen, which he now possesses. And then later in chapter 22, he admits that he has finally burst his sleep, meaning he has finally reached he has finally transcended, in other words. So yeah, he basically, in the last chapter, readers can sense his optimism for life, which was absent within the first chapter. Finally, there is a significance of self-reliance. Self-reliance here means a reliance on one's own powers and resources rather than those of others. So this is heavily depicted by Henderson. The fact that he had to up the familiarity and comfort of his previous life and into one of the unknown. Basically, he left the sanctity of home and security for a foreign land, and that was heavily aided by a very strong self-reliance, relying on his guts and his own instincts. So you can see so there is a form of corrupted self-reliance that is depicted within the book, and that is when Henderson blew up the system in the Ernewi village. When he came to a decision to help the villagers, it was purely on his own opinion, his own decision. But the fact that it failed, his attempt to help the villagers failed, was most likely due to the fact that he did not consult others, instead he consulted himself. So this is a very, very corruptive form of self-reliance, when you rely solely on yourself and disregard the logic and rationale of others. So yeah, that occurred in chapter 9, and you have an excerpt below speaking of his heart-wrenching acknowledgement of his fault. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much for your attention.